The Hotel The Marsh was a bastion of luxury and sophistication, a monument to opulence erected in the heart of the financial district. Its marble walls, adorned with meticulously carved sculptures, seemed to belong to another world, where time passed to the rhythm of the ticking of customers' gold watches and the discreet murmurs of discussions on the financial markets. Solid wooden doors, painted gold, opened into an impressive hall, where crystal chandeliers hung like stars, bursting with light, dazzling those lucky enough to enter this sacred space. The air, still scented with jasmine and rosewood, mingled with the echo of the customers' stiletto heels and the uniformed valets who moved noiselessly, their gestures with almost choreographic precision. Customers arrived like lords from another time, their entrance marked by the roar of the engines of their Rolls-Royces and the screed of prestige that surrounded them. It was not just a hotel, it was a kingdom where the powerful met to trade, negotiate and rest from the outside world. But behind this glittering facade, everything was only appearance. Every smile exchanged, every greeting, was a carefully orchestrated dance. The employees, like mute shadows, served without question, their lives hanging on the decisions of those they served. Among these shadows was Amina, a 32-year-old black woman, discreet but unwavering in her dignity. She worked at the Marsh for 5 years, her precise gestures and her unwavering gaze making her an exemplary employee. She was neither the youngest nor the loudest, but there was a certain majesty in her calm, a kind of quiet strength that attracted attention, even without trying to shine. Her skin, a beautiful deep black, contrasted with the brightness of the place, but she wore her identity like a shield, a rampart against mistrust and judgment. Her white colleagues greeted her politely, but their looks always betrayed concealed embarrassment. The customers saw her as a simple silhouette, a shadow in the background, like those they were used to meeting behind the scenes of their busy lives. They greeted her with a fixed smile, as if it was necessary to acknowledge her presence without ever considering her as their equal. But Amina knew her role was much more complex. She carried the invisible burden of all those erased in this golden bubble. In a place like this, where power and money intertwine, employees were invisible, relegated to unseen functions. However, Amina knew that every smile, every gesture, every word exchanged with her colleagues or customers was only a small act of resistance. She wasn't there to be forgotten. She was there to maintain her dignity, even if she was often forced to express it in the dark corners of this hotel. This morning, however, something was different. The atmosphere was heavy, almost palpable, like an electrical tension ready to burst. Amina stood in the lobby, arranging freshly delivered flowers to welcome the first customers of the day. His fingers gently touched the delicate petals, his mind a little elsewhere, when the sharp voice of Mr. Gerard Leblanc, the hotel manager, broke the tranquility. "You over there, Amina," he called in a dry and authoritative voice, not even bothering to come closer. She looked up slowly. There he was, imposing in his well-cut suit, his gaze cold and emotionless, as if he were the only one to exist in this room. Every movement of this man exuded an implacable power, an unshakable certainty that he was the one who decided the fate of everyone else. Amina held his gaze, a mixture of challenge and calm in her eyes. She knew what these calls meant. Mr. Leblanc had never taken the trouble to speak to him correctly. He treated her as he treated furniture, with icy indifference, as if she were nothing more than an object in a precious setting. But this morning, there was something in his posture that betrayed another intention. His gestures were more urgent, more arrogant. "You black girl, obey me," he said coldly, his words biting the air like a violent slap. Amina froze for a moment, the weight of the sentence ringing in her ears. He thought he had terrified her. He believed that, like so many others before him, his words would be enough to silence her, erase her humanity and return her to her place, the one he thought was assigned to her. But Amina had learned, over the years, to never let a man's hatred or cruelty define her space, her dignity, or her future. Her experiences, the daily humiliations, the way people looked at her, had shaped her. Each slight, each microaggression, had been a building block in building her resilience. She inhaled deeply, her chest rising with the slowness of controlled breathing, her mind refocusing on what was essential, her dignity. She would not allow herself to be destabilized by this little man, by this abuse of power. His gaze hardened without showing an ounce of fear. She knew that fear was what he was waiting for, what he was looking for. He wanted to see her bend, twist under the weight of his arrogance. But Amina was not like the others. She had learned to control her body, her mind, to channel all the energy of injustice in one direction: resistance. She responded calmly, but firmly. "Mr. LeBlanc, I ask you not to speak to me like that. I am here to do my job, and not to be reduced to an insult. If you have any instructions to give me, please do so in a professional manner." The director stared at her for a moment, unsettled by her response. He was used to his orders being followed without question, to employees lowering their eyes, accepting their place, submitting to the silent humiliation he inflicted on them. But Amina was not a faded figure, a silhouette of servitude. She was a woman full of pride, of dignity, and this part of her he could not control. His gaze was direct, implacable, a gaze that exuded the quiet strength of a woman who had survived too many ordeals to let herself be crushed by a man like him. Furious at seeing himself challenged, Mr. LeBlanc was already raising his voice to retaliate, ready to return to the charge, to assert his authority. But at the same time, a group of prestigious customers entered the hall, attracting his attention. The glass doors opened to reveal businessmen in suits and ties and women in designer dresses, their presence immediately imposing a change in the atmosphere of the place. Mr. LeBlanc, seeing his chance to strengthen his domination over Amina slip through his fingers, turned away abruptly, his eyes blazing with contempt. He gave her one last glance, a quick look but loaded with all the devaluation he thought he deserved. Then, with an air of superiority tinged with frustration, he walked away, his power momentarily reaffirmed by his status. Amina didn't move. She didn't follow him with her gaze. She had experienced this kind of scene hundreds of times. She knew that women like her, in places like this, were there to serve and be forgotten. But this time, something had broken inside her. This was not just an isolated humiliation. No, this kind of treatment was systemic. It was a violence that did not just strike one person, but struck generations, calling into question the very existence of a human being, as if their space was not legitimate. She turned her back on Mr. LeBlanc and continued her work, but her mind could not stop ruminating on this humiliation. She knew that this was not an isolated incident, a blip. Every day she faced a different version of this same oppression. She saw it in the cold looks of customers, in the abrupt gestures of her colleagues, in the impunity of superiors. But this time he had gone too far. He had touched her where it hurt, where you could no longer pretend everything was okay. She wasn't going to forget him. She wasn't going to let herself be silenced. In the days that followed, Amina set about her work with almost mechanical precision. She was not distracted. She did not let herself be overcome by overly invasive thoughts. But deep inside her, something had changed. She was no longer just the self-effacing black woman who smiled tirelessly to ease tensions in the luxury hotel. It had become an internal battlefield, a silent war against invisible forces. She felt within herself a new energy, a desire not to let herself be crushed, not to conform to the vision of the world that Mr. LeBlanc and so many others had for her. She knew that confronting him, and everything he stood for, was only a matter of time. The violence he had inflicted on her with his words was only one facet of this larger struggle. She had seen this violence in many forms before him, but this time, she was going to react. She was going to fight back. But not in the way he expected. Amina knew that the humiliation and oppression were not just personal, they were systemic. She wasn't just going to defend herself. It was going to attack the very foundations of this system. She began gathering information, observing other employees and their interactions with management more closely. Every day, she heard whispers, half-veiled confidences about the injustices they all suffered, in this merciless hierarchy. Amina knew she was not alone. Voices lurked in the corridors, ready to rise. She felt ready, more determined than ever, to no longer be the invisible one in this luxury hotel. She would, one day, faced this reality with unfailing determination. She knew it was only a matter of time.